What if grief wasn't the end of love, but a doorway to its deepest truth? A widow drowning in loss, a horse that refused to forget, and a secret hidden in the mountains that would prove some promises outlived death itself. This is the story of how one woman's shattered heart was led through darkness by 4 hooves and an impossible loyalty, to find that her husband's final gift wasn't goodbye, it was forever. If you believe that love transcends all boundaries, even death, please hit that like button and subscribe. It truly helps our channel grow and share more stories just like this one. The Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina rise from the earth like the backbone of something ancient and eternal. Their peaks shrouded in mist that clings to the valleys like grief clings to memory. It is a landscape of waterfalls and narrow dirt roads, of forests so dense the light barely penetrates, where black bears still roam and the air smells of wet moss and mountain laurel. The town of Copper Falls sits in a hollow carved by the Nantahala River, population 2,400. A place where pickup trucks outnumber sedans and everyone waves at everyone, whether they know them or not. It is a community built on logging, tourism, and the quiet resilience of people who choose the hard beauty of mountain life over the easy comfort of anywhere else. The main street runs for exactly 4 blocks, lined with brick storefronts that haven't changed in 40 years. There's a hardware store with creaking wooden floors, a diner that serves breakfast all day, a post office where the postmaster knows everyone's business before the mail is sorted, and a gas station that doubles as the town's informal gathering place. The mountains press in on all sides, creating a bowl of civilization surrounded by wilderness, a place where the modern world feels distant and the rhythms of life still follow the seasons, the weather, the ancient pulse of the land itself. In the winter of 2021, the mountains were particularly cold, the kind of cold that seeps into bones and settles there like an unwelcome guest. Snow came early that year, blanketing the peaks in white silence, and the river ran dark and swift, carrying the runoff from high country ice. The temperature dropped below freezing in early November and stayed there, creating treacherous ice on the back roads and forcing the school buses to chain up their tires. Wood smoke hung heavy in the valley, a permanent haze that smelled of oak and pine, as every house burned their stoves day and night just to keep the chill at bay. The deer came down from the high country, desperate for food, raiding gardens and standing in the middle of the roads at dawn like ghost sentinels. It was a winter that felt heavier than most, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to break. It was in this season, on the morning of December 3rd, that Alice Whitmore buried her husband. His name was George Whitmore, and he was 52 years old when his heart stopped beating. A massive coronary while splitting firewood behind their small cabin on Ridgeline Road, the axe still in his hands when Alice found him lying in the sawdust, his face peaceful, as if he'd simply decided to take a nap. There had been no warning, no illness, no slow decline. One moment he was alive, laughing over breakfast about the deer he'd seen on the trail, and 8 hours later he was gone, as if life were nothing more than a light switch someone had flipped off without asking. The funeral was small, held at the Copper Falls Methodist Church, a white clapboard building with a crooked steeple. 40 people came, neighbors mostly, people from the hardware store where George had worked for 20 years, the volunteer fire department where he'd served. They spoke in hushed, uncomfortable tones, offering Alice casseroles and condolences in equal measure, their words feeling hollow and inadequate because what do you say to a woman who has lost the center of her universe? Alice was 49 years old, a woman with silver-streaked auburn hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. She'd been married to George for 27 years since she was 22, and he was 25, young and stupid, and so in love it hurt. They'd never had children, not by choice but by cruel biology, a fact that had once been a source of quiet sorrow but had eventually become just another thread in the fabric of their life together. Instead, they'd built their world around each other, around their small cabin, their garden, the trails they hiked, and the horses they kept. Alice moved through the funeral like a ghost, shaking hands she didn't remember, accepting hugs that left her feeling more alone. When it was over, when the last guest had left and the casseroles were stacked in her refrigerator like monuments to pity, she walked out to the barn. The barn was a simple structure, red paint fading to rust, with 3 stalls and a small tack room that smelled of leather and hay, and the good, honest scent of horses. They'd kept 2 horses for the past decade, gentle trail horses they rode through the mountains on weekends, but one had died the previous spring, leaving only one. His name was Black Jack, a 12-year-old bay gelding, tall and solid, with intelligent eyes and a white blaze running down his face like a lightning strike. George had loved that horse with a quiet, unspoken devotion, spending hours grooming him, talking to him in low tones, riding him up into the high country where the cell service died and the world felt clean. Alice stood outside Black Jack's stall, her breath misting in the cold air, and looked at the horse. Black Jack looked back, his ears forward, and whinnied softly, a sound of recognition and also of question. "Where is he?" the horse seemed to ask. "Where is the man who always comes?" Alice's throat tightened. "He's gone," she whispered. "He's not coming back." Black Jack pawed at the straw, his head bobbing, agitated. He whinnied again, louder this time, a sound that echoed through the empty barn and seemed to crack something open inside Alice's chest. She turned and walked back to the house, unable to bear the weight of the horse's grief on top of her own. The days that followed were a blur of numb routine. Alice woke, fed the horse, fed herself though she tasted nothing, stared at the television without seeing it, and went to bed. The house felt enormous and suffocating at the same time, every corner filled with George's absence. His boots by the door, his coffee cup still unwashed in the sink, his reading glasses on the arm of the couch. She couldn't move them, couldn't bear to erase the evidence that he'd existed, that he'd been real. On the 10th day after the funeral, Alice woke to the sound of hooves on gravel. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, disoriented. The sound came again, a rhythmic clopping, insistent. She pulled on her robe and stumbled to the front window. Black Jack was standing in the driveway, fully tacked, saddle and bridle on, the reins trailing on the ground. The barn door was open, swinging gently in the wind. Alice ran outside, her bare feet slapping against the frozen ground, her breath pluming in the icy air. "Black Jack, what are you doing?" The horse turned his head toward her, ears pricked forward, and then he turned and began walking down the driveway, toward the road. "Black Jack, stop!" Alice called, running after him. But the horse didn't stop. He walked with purpose, his strides long and deliberate, heading toward the trail that led up into the mountains, the trail George had ridden 100 times. Alice caught up to him, grabbing the reins, pulling him to a halt. Black Jack resisted, pulling back, his body tense. "No," Alice said firmly, her voice shaking. "You can't go up there. Not without him." She led the horse back to the barn, unsaddled him, checked the stall door. It was latched. She latched it again, twice, testing it. "How did you get out?" she muttered. Black Jack stood in his stall, watching her with those dark, knowing eyes, and Alice felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The next morning, it happened again. Alice woke to the sound of hooves. Black Jack was in the driveway, tacked up, waiting. This time, the stall door wasn't just unlatched, it was open. The bolt somehow slid free. "This is impossible," Alice said aloud, staring at the door. Horses couldn't unlatch bolts. They couldn't saddle themselves. But there he stood, bridled and saddled, his breath steaming in the morning light, waiting. Alice led him back to the barn, unsaddled him again, and this time she tied the stall door shut with baling twine, knotting it tight. She went back to the house and called her neighbor, a retired rancher named Ted Boone who lived a mile down the road. "Ted, I think I'm losing my mind," she said when he answered. "Alice, you just lost your husband. Give yourself some time." "It's not that. It's Black Jack. He keeps getting out. He keeps saddling himself." There was a pause. Then, gently, "Horses can't saddle themselves, Alice. I know that, but I'm telling you, he's doing it. Twice now. You want me to come take a look at the barn? Maybe there's a latch problem or something." Ted came over that afternoon, inspected the stall, the doors, the tack. Everything was secure, normal. He looked at Alice with kind, worried eyes. "Alice, maybe you're sleepwalking. Maybe you're doing it and not remembering." "I'm not sleepwalking, Ted. Grief does strange things to people." Alice didn't argue. She thanked him and sent him home. But that night, she set an alarm on her phone for every 2 hours and checked the barn each time. At 2 a.m., Black Jack was in his stall, asleep. At 4 a.m., the same. At 6 a.m., he was gone. Alice ran outside in her pajamas and found Black Jack a quarter-mile down the road, heading toward the trailhead. This time, she didn't bring him back. She stood in the middle of the cold, dark road, watching the horse walk away, and something inside her broke open. "Where are you going?" she shouted after him. "What do you want?" Black Jack stopped. He turned his head, looked back at her, and whinnied. It was a sound of urgency, of insistence. "Follow me," it seemed to say. Alice stood there, shivering, her breath coming in short gasps. She was exhausted, hollowed out, her mind a fog of grief and confusion. But there was something in the horse's stance, something so certain, so determined that it cut through the numbness. "Fine," she whispered. "Fine. I'll follow you." She went back to the house, threw on jeans, boots, a heavy coat. She grabbed a flashlight and her phone, though she knew there'd be no signal once they got into the high country. She walked back to where Black Jack stood waiting and climbed into the saddle. The moment she was seated, Black Jack began to move. He didn't wait for her cue, didn't respond to the reins. He simply walked, his stride purposeful, heading up the old fire road that wound into the mountains. Alice let him lead. The trail was one George had loved, a narrow path that climbed through dense forest, past waterfalls and granite outcroppings, up to a high ridge where you could see 3 states on a clear day. It was a 6-mile ride to the ridge, steep and treacherous in places, not a trail you took lightly. Dawn broke as they climbed, the sky turning from black to gray to a pale, washed-out blue. The forest around them was silent except for the crunch of snow under Black Jack's hooves and the distant call of a raven. Alice's hands were numb on the reins, her face stinging from the cold, but she didn't turn back. She couldn't explain why, but she trusted the horse. An hour into the ride, Black Jack left the main trail. He turned onto an overgrown path Alice had never noticed before, a narrow track barely wide enough for a horse, choked with fallen branches and underbrush. "Black Jack, where are you going?" she murmured. But the horse pushed forward, breaking through the brush, his body moving with the confidence of familiarity. He'd been here before, many times. The path climbed steeply, winding through a stand of old-growth hemlocks, their trunks thick as cars, their branches blocking out the sky. Alice ducked under low-hanging limbs, her heart pounding, her mind racing. What was George doing up here? Why had he never mentioned this trail? After another 20 minutes, the forest opened up. They emerged into a small clearing, maybe an acre across, surrounded by towering pines. And in the center of the clearing, hidden from the world, was a cabin. Alice's breath stopped. The cabin was small, maybe 800 square feet, built from hand-hewn logs that glowed golden in the morning light. It had a steep metal roof, a stone chimney, a covered porch with 2 rocking chairs. The windows were real glass, not plastic, and the door was solid oak with a hand-carved handle. The porch railings were crafted from peeled saplings, fitted together with mortise and tenon joints that spoke of patience and skill. A small stack of split firewood sat neatly arranged beside the door, protected from the weather by the porch overhang. Even from where she sat frozen in the saddle, Alice could see the care that had gone into every detail. The way the logs were notched and fitted so precisely that barely any chinking would be needed. The way the stone chimney rose straight and true, built from river rock that must have been hauled up this mountain one piece at a time. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was impossible. Alice slid off Black Jack's back, her legs shaking, and walked toward the cabin. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. This wasn't here. This didn't exist. She'd hiked these mountains with George for years, and there was nothing up here. Nothing but forest and rock. How had he hidden this from her? How many hours, how many days had he spent up here, building in secret while she thought he was running errands or helping neighbors or working overtime at the hardware store? Her boots crunched on the frozen ground as she approached, each step feeling like moving through a dream. The kind where reality bends and nothing makes sense, but everything feels significant. Black Jack followed behind her, his reins dragging, his breathing calm now, as if he knew his work was done, as if this moment had been inevitable all along. She climbed the porch steps, her boots echoing on the new wood, and pushed open the door. The interior was unfinished but clearly loved. The walls were bare logs, the floor rough-cut pine planks. There was a wood stove in the corner, a stack of firewood beside it, a small kitchen area with open shelving, a table made from a single slab of walnut, 2 chairs, and beyond that, a doorway leading to what must be a bedroom. Alice walked through the cabin in a daze, her fingers trailing over the wood, feeling the texture of it, the reality of it. On the kitchen counter was a toolbox, George's toolbox, the red metal scratched and dented from years of use. Beside it, a thermos with cold coffee still inside. A pair of work gloves stained with sawdust. Her vision blurred with tears. He'd been building this. For months, maybe years, he'd been coming up here, working in secret, building this cabin. For them. She walked into the bedroom. It was small, just big enough for a bed, which wasn't there yet, and a single window that looked out over the valley. On the floor beside the window was a small nightstand, handmade, with a single drawer. And on top of the nightstand was an envelope. Alice's name was written on it in George's familiar slanted handwriting. Her knees buckled. She sank to the floor, reaching for the envelope with trembling hands. She opened it carefully, as if it might disintegrate, and pulled out the letter inside. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind George would have bought at the stationery store in town, planning this moment. The letter was dated November 28th, 5 days before he died. "My Alice," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't get to finish this place. I'm sorry I didn't get to bring you here the way I planned, with your eyes closed and your hand in mine, and watch your face when you saw it. I'm sorry for all the things we won't get to do. But I'm not sorry for loving you. I could never be sorry for that. I started building this cabin 2 years ago. I know I should have told you, but I wanted it to be a surprise, a gift for our 30th anniversary. I wanted to build us a place where we could grow old together, away from everything, just you and me and the mountains. I wanted to give you a dream, made of wood and nails and all the love I've carried for you since the day we met. I've been coming up here every Saturday telling you I was helping Ted with his fences or running errands in town. I hated lying to you, Alice. But I wanted this to be perfect. I wanted to see your face when I brought you here and told you this was ours, that we could retire here, spend our days hiking and reading and just being together. I know I'm not good with words. I know I never told you enough how much you mean to me. But I built this with my hands. Every log, every joint, every piece of it. And every moment I was up here, I was thinking of you. I was thinking of your laugh, the way you hum when you're cooking, the way you look at me like I'm something worth looking at. You saved me, Alice. When we met, I was lost, angry, a kid with no direction. You gave me a reason to be better. You gave me a life worth living. And if I'm gone now, if my heart gave out before I could finish this place, then I need you to know something. This cabin isn't the gift. You are. You've always been the gift. This place is just wood and stone. You're the home I've been living in for 27 years, so here's what I need you to do. Finish this place if you want to. Or don't. Sell it. Burn it down. I don't care. But don't you dare stop living, Alice. Don't you dare let my death be the end of your story. You're 49 years old. You've got so much life left. Live it. Laugh again. Love again if you can. I won't be jealous. I'll be grateful that you had the courage to keep going. And on the days when it's hard, when the grief feels like it's going to swallow you whole, I need you to remember this. I loved you. I loved you with everything I had. And wherever I am now, whatever comes after this, I'm still loving you. That doesn't stop. That never stops. Yours forever, George. Alice sat on the floor of the unfinished cabin, the letter clutched to her chest, and wept. She wept until her throat was raw, until her eyes burned, until there was nothing left inside her but emptiness. The sound of her crying filled the small bedroom, echoing off the bare log walls, a sound of such profound grief and love intertwined that it seemed to become part of the cabin itself, seeping into the wood grain, the floor planks, the very foundations George had laid with his own hands. She cried for the life they'd planned, for the retirement they'd never have, for the mornings they'd never spend in those rocking chairs watching the sun rise over the valley. She cried for the man who had loved her so completely that he'd spent 2 years hauling logs and stones up a mountain in secret, building her a dream with nothing but determination and devotion. And she cried because even in death he was still taking care of her, still showing her the way forward, still loving her with an intensity that transcended the grave. Then she stood up. She walked back through the cabin, seeing it now not as a building but as a declaration, a monument to love that refused to quit even in the face of death. She walked out onto the porch where Black Jack stood waiting, his reins trailing, his eyes calm. "You knew," she said to the horse. "You knew he was building this. You brought him here, didn't you?" Black Jack lowered his head, and Alice wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her face into his warm coat. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not letting me forget." She stayed at the cabin until the sun was high, walking through the rooms, touching the wood, memorizing every detail. She found blueprints rolled up in the corner, George's plans for the rest of the build, a loft, a bigger kitchen, a greenhouse. The drawings were meticulous, annotated in his small, careful handwriting with notes about measurements, materials, costs. She found sketches he'd made of furniture he planned to build, a bed frame with carved headboard, built-in bookshelves, a window seat in the loft where she could read and watch the seasons change. She found a jar of nails, a half-finished rocking chair, a stack of books about timber framing with pages dog-eared and passages underlined. In a corner of the main room, she discovered a wooden crate filled with things he'd been collecting for the cabin, a set of cast-iron cookware still in the packaging, oil lamps with glass chimneys, a hand pump for the sink he'd planned to install, wildflower seeds in paper packets labeled in his handwriting with planting instructions. She found a notebook where he'd kept a journal of his progress, entries dating back 2 full years, describing the challenges of getting materials up the mountain, his satisfaction when a wall went up straight, his excitement about surprising her. She found evidence of his love in every corner, in every nail driven, in every board carefully fitted, in the sheer magnitude of the secret he'd kept because he wanted to give her something perfect. When she finally rode back down the mountain, it was late afternoon. The world looked different now, sharper, more real. The grief was still there, a constant ache in her chest, but it was joined by something else: gratitude, wonder, a fierce, burning determination not to waste the gift he'd given her. Over the next 6 months, Alice did something she never thought she'd be able to do. She finished the cabin. She hired a local carpenter, a quiet man named Jack Reeves, and together they worked through the spring and summer, following George's plans, building the loft, installing the kitchen, adding the finishing touches. Alice learned how to use a circular saw, how to fit joints, how to stain wood. Her hands, soft from years of office work, became calloused and strong. She lost weight, gained muscle, found that physical labor was the only thing that quieted her mind. Black Jack made the trip up the mountain with her every weekend, carrying supplies, standing patiently while she worked. The horse seemed content now, his earlier restlessness gone. He'd completed his mission. He'd led her to the truth. On a warm Saturday in August, Alice stood on the porch of the completed cabin and looked out over the valley. The place was finished, exactly as George had envisioned it. The walls were chinked, the windows hung, the wood stove installed and tested. The furniture was in place, the bed made with quilts she'd sewn herself. It was home. She sat in one of the rocking chairs, the one George had been building, which Jack had helped her finish, and she rocked slowly, listening to the wind in the pines. She thought about George's letter, about his insistence that she keep living. She thought about the years ahead, the uncertainty of them, the possibility. And for the first time since his death, she felt something other than grief. She felt peace. That evening, as the sun set and the mountains turned purple and gold, Alice made a decision. She would live in the cabin, at least part-time. She would retire from her job at the insurance office in town, the job she'd hated for 15 years, and she would spend her days here, in the place George had built for them. She would hike, read, tend a garden, learn to live with the silence and the solitude. And she would remember him, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. 2 years later, Alice Whitmore still lived in the cabin on the mountain. She'd sold the house in Copper Falls, keeping only what mattered. Blackjack had a small pasture beside the cabin, and Alice rode him daily, exploring trails she and George had never found. She'd started writing, something she'd always wanted to do but never had time for. Filling notebooks with stories about the mountains, about love, about loss. She wasn't lonely. She had neighbors who checked on her, friends who visited. And she had George, not as a ghost, but as a presence, woven into every beam and board of the cabin, a constant reminder that love, real love, doesn't end when the heart stops beating. On the anniversary of George's death, Alice rode Blackjack up to the ridge where the view stretched forever. She brought flowers, wildflowers she'd picked from the meadow, and she laid them on a flat rock overlooking the valley. "I finished it," she said aloud, to the wind, to the sky, to wherever George was. "I finished our dream, and I'm living just like you told me to." The wind picked up, cold and clean, and somewhere in the forest a hawk cried out, a sharp, piercing sound that felt like an answer. Alice smiled, her eyes wet, and climbed back into the saddle. Blackjack turned toward home without being asked, and together they rode down the mountain toward the cabin that was built from love and loss, and the stubborn refusal to give up, toward the life that was still waiting to be lived. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that love is stronger than death, and that the ones we've lost never truly leave us, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who's grieving, someone who needs to know that healing is possible, that hope can be found even in the darkest valleys. And remember, the greatest gifts are often the ones we discover when we have the courage to keep moving forward, even when the path is steep and we can't see where it leads.